Another week, another nickel, and hey everyone, JSD Cool here, and yes, welcome back to another live stream from Coolcraft, and once again, hello there. This week, yes, I am back, and I don't know, I've been kind of busy this week, so this week's episode is either really gonna suck or probably be postponed to next week when I actually have time to do shit, and I'm not distracted for a good part of the week and then have shit to do at the end of the week. Anyhow, that's not important. Today we are once again building the roads here in downtown as we are getting close to them being complete, but as you can see there are still, of course, roads that haven't been constructed yet. So, yeah, I guess with that out of the way, we just get straight into the process of making them. And I, of course, did not collect any resources before stream because I am a professional streamer and know what the heck I'm doing. There. Oop, that'll work for now, I guess. Well, you know, we'll do it in layers. We'll get the glow. We'll put down the stone first for some reason, then we can put the glowstone later because I don't have any of that on me and I have to go back to my base. But hey, I haven't really done much this week, as I mentioned, so there's no spoilers, I don't think. Yeah, no, there's no spoilers currently because I haven't done shit. Oh gosh. See, this is what happens when I don't just give up in January on actually making content. I just make absolute dog crap. Maybe that's why I don't do it anymore. Anyhow, let's see. Schematic for core building. Syncmatics. Downtown. Lag. Much lag. Very much lag. Oh, it says 60 FPS. Okay. Oh, right. I have the, I was having some... Actually, I'm still kind of having some weird issues with performance where, Oh. What? Okay, hang on. Is that here? There we go. So... Actually, I guess I could talk about this. So I'm having weird issues. And mind you, I am still on 20.2 at the moment because I'm too lazy to upgrade to 20.4. I'll probably just skip 20.4 and update when 20.5 comes out. There's some new cool stuff in that update anyway. Where was I going with that? But the gist is anyhow, yeah, I'm having some weird performance issues in Minecraft where if I'm on vanilla, I was specifically around the wheat farm that I built last episode. I was getting some gnarly frame rate issues with just standing there with some of the observers in it, and I don't know why. It's so weird. So I, installed Sodium again, which I uninstalled because of this next issue that I'm going to talk about here, which is if I have Sodium on for a while and I just AFK or even not AFK, just move around after a while. Horrible frame drops whenever it's loading chunks, and apparently it's because it's de-rendering chunks, or what was the thing? It was F3. Nope, that one is the pie chart. So I go game render. Whoop, that was F2, not number 2. Okay, game render. See, level terrain. I don't think that was that. The hell, Lightmatica. Okay, apparently Lightmatica is in this menu actually. I have no idea what it was. But anyhow, level GUI unspecified. Okay, well, yeah, it's not important, but it was like deallocating chunks or something like that was like what was using the most of my rendering, and it was like 6 FPS, and I don't know why this is. Maybe it's a weird mod combination that I'm having, which would be very unfortunate because I don't know what mod could possibly be causing it. I just hope that whatever's causing it is fixed for newer versions of Minecraft, and because I'm on an older version of Minecraft, that's why no one cares. But again, don't know what is actually causing it, besides, being an issue with Sodium. Of course, it could also be an issue with the 3D models texture pack that I generally use, because I know that's been an issue with Sodium in the past. I was specifically playing on a Minecraft world where I decided to base in a jungle, or go into a jungle at first. And because I had 3D vines pack on, it caused, with sodium, not without sodium, caused the game to lag like crazy. And I didn't know what it was besides sodium for a while. When I eventually found out, I was like, oh, it's because the, it doesn't do well with culling the 3D rendered, textures instead of just culling the 2D, or culling the 2D faces for like vines and stuff. I think I don't have the 3D vines anymore specifically because of that, but it could be because of the 3D rendering that after a while sodium starts, you know, having issues. But I have a feeling it's more because of some sort of memory leak, maybe caused by sodium, maybe caused by something else that does rendering. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, so that's my life a little bit. Another issue is actually something I talked about recently in a video, which is my editing software just having audio issues for no reason that then sometimes get solved. I was like, I'm pretty sure it didn't do this before, and so I downgraded to older version that didn't work, downgraded to an even older version, and then it actually did work. I was like, yeah, no, something changed at some point with this, because I had an update for a while, but something changed at some point that made it so it wasn't always actually, what's the word? It wasn't actually working proper, or working properly, I guess would be a good way to say that. I don't know if it's the best way to say it, but it's a good way to say it. And yeah, people on the forum were when I tried to report it as a bug, were completely unhelpful about the actual issue. It was like, oh, you know, maybe it's just like your setup man, or, you know, change the command line options for the audio engine. It's like, okay, this is clearly an update that happened from something that happened like a while back in the development process, because I've only after updating started having this problem. And then I downgraded, of course. I probably could upgrade a little bit past where I'm at, but it just takes so long to install that I was like, I don't really want to go through every single version to find the exact version in which the issue started to occur. Although with the version that I'm currently on for whatever reason, I'm now having an issue where the timeline scrolling is kind of being dumb, where it's like the playhead will get to the end of the currently visible section of the timeline, and then instead of just starting to pan the timeline, it just jumps the entire timeline like over a whole page, which is really annoying and jarring, and leads to some inconsistencies of where it places the playhead when I'm like copy pasting clips into the timeline. So that's fun. I gotta try playing around with more versions of that, but you know, haven't, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, haven't really had the time to do anything like that this week because I was, well, you know, doing classwork stuff. I was actually playing other Minecraft stuff, which kind of gave me an idea for what I think I'm doing on Sunday for a live stream, which was, you know, an interesting experience to say the least. Yeah. And then oh, okay. So here, this is kind of transitioning onto something I could talk about next, which is kind of like the absurd coursework loads that sometimes you get in college. So I'm currently taking an American history course, which is specifically modern American history. It's a 100 level course. So, you know, it should be pretty, you know, entry level basic bitch shit. But this course is asynchronous, which means it doesn't actually have a meeting time or whatever. And I've taken asynchronous courses before, so I was like, oh yeah, you know what, it'll be fine. It'll actually be easier than doing it in person. Well, the thing I didn't account for is that, and I had no way of knowing at the time when I signed up for this course is structured weird compared to most other courses I've taken. They give you work to complete on a monthly basis instead of like a weekly basis. So just at the beginning of the month, here's everything you do. Just do most of it at the end of the month. But that's not necessarily the bad part. Some assignments are just like, but you know, you deal with those. The bad part about this is the other part of the course, you know, the actual learning part, which is not being provided at all by the professor. They said, buy these 2 textbooks. And I'm just going to give you a number of chapters, full fucking chapters to read from the textbook every fucking month. And just from the first month here alone, it's like, as from what I've calculated, assuming both the textbooks have a similar number of pages per chapter, at least 500 pages in the month. And mind you, this is the content that you have to do the work on. So this is before any of the actual work. You have to read 500 pages of a textbook. And that's the entirety of the instruction you get on the material, is just the textbook. I mean, it is American history, so like you could probably Google all this stuff and get the answers just fine. Well, it's not really answers because, you know, the assignments aren't really like you're like, here's a multiple choice test or whatever, you know. It's like, all right, what was like, or it's like discussion post about so-and-so topic. And, you know, analyze these sources, because that's what you do in history classes, apparently. Did I mention this is a 100 level class? Which is why I was super not expecting this to be the content that I would be learning in this class. So anyhow, on Thursday, instead of actually spending time, I don't know, working on Coolcraft stuff or whatever, I spent a bit of time in the morning just starting to read through one of the chapters. I think I spent over 2 hours, just one chapter alone, and towards the end I wasn't even reading stuff. I was just skimming through like the headlines that were in the textbook and just being like, yep, okay, cool, yeah. Okay, that's kind of... Occasionally I'd go and read something, and read like a section, and it would take a long time. It would be like, oh yeah. Mind you, this chapter was not short. This single chapter was like 40 pages long alone. And I think that's one of the shorter chapters I had to read. So I'm going to have to figure out how I'm actually doing shit in that class. Because it's not feasible for me to just read the entirety of what's actually being read and still be able to complete all the assignments on time, while also being able to do other shit with my life, like do work for other courses. Or make content / relax. So, I'm saying this because if I start to slack on making videos in the next couple weeks, that's probably why. Then of course, the other, I guess, reason why I didn't have much time to do stuff this week was because actually today was the first lab class for physics. I'm taking physics this semester. Which, so far, I remember a lot of it from high school, so that's good. But today was the first day of the lab class, which does take a decent amount of time. And then after lab, you gotta do the, like, finish up the calculations, do, like, the lab report stuff, and pre-lab questions for next week, all that sort of stuff. Which took a while, and then I was, you know, doing some homework for the actual theory part of physics. And after I did that, I spent time doing something completely different, because I was like, that'd be interesting. Because that's another thing, I will get distracted by shit. Oh yeah, that's right. In the beginning of this week, I completely forgot about this. I finally released an update to my game this week. It's a patch, but the patch notes are girthier than some major updates, so I think it's fine. I mean, there's not too much more content, but hey, it's a little bit, I guess, easier to make content because we got those 3D blueprints now. Also, something that takes my attention away from doing stuff. I mean, obviously I have other courses besides these ones that I mentioned, but like, on Monday? Not Monday. Was it Monday? Or was it Tuesday? I don't remember. I just suddenly decided to work on something, because I was like, you know, I kind of had an idea for this, and I just want to start doing it. As part of Skinny Man, which is that the very last thing in the patch notes, which I did before I released it, which is the updater, or the automatic updater, which has now expanded compatibility to Linux, which was a huge thing. And it's also been updated to be a bit better, because the original version was Windows only and completely cryptic and how it worked, and it wasn't very straightforward. So, like, the way it worked was that it was very much like a manual labor, just take these static inputs and produce static outputs type thing. it took the link. So the way it worked was the game provided the updater program with the actual new version of the game to download, like the actual. Actually, I just realized my webcam is not in the corner because of the heck? What? Okay, because of the stream I did last week. That's right, and I don't even know. It's probably fine. All right. Hopefully that's the correct position for it. Sorry about that. I was just looking over at OBS and I saw that. Alright. What was I talking about? Alright. So, yeah, so the game itself would reach out or would figure out which specific download or what specifically should be what file should be downloaded for the next version for you. And a lot of that was hard-coded. So obviously it was Windows only, so I only had to worry about the Windows versions. But the game would be able to check itself, see like, okay, I have the Java installation in my folder, so therefore it's likely that that the user probably doesn't have an installation of Java 17 ready, sitting and usable on the system, so I should be downloading the embedded Java version of the game for Windows. And then it'd grab the specific link for that, which was hard-coded somewhere else. And there's only ever one option, because it would only ever download the latest version of the game, because that's the only links I provided, and even if I did, it would select one of 2 links that were provided for it. And then it would just like tell the updater, okay, here's the link to the file you need to download. Just do it, you pussy. And that was basically what it did. There was a couple other things that it sent to the updater. Like, the one bit of little human interaction or human feedback that I gave the updater initially was just like, hey, you're updating to this version, which was specifically the game. Just put in the configuration file for the updater. It's like, here's the name of the version that you're going up to. And it just displayed that on the screen for them. Because obviously the game has to check what the latest version is so that it knows there's an update. So that's what it did, and that's what I, by extension, made the actual updater just piggyback off of that, because I guess I was lazy. But that was that system. It worked, but I recently had inspiration to work on it to make it better. So I did, and the key goal with this was actually make it cross-platform. But the first thing I did, actually, let's talk about how the first one worked a little more. So yeah, if you weren't on Windows, you would never have seen this. But, is you simply would, it'd open up from the game launching it, and it would just be like, hey, you're ready to update, and then there'd just be a button to update. Obviously, it'd say, here's the version you're updating to, but that you had no control other than just click the update button. When you click the update button, you just get text feedback being like, hey, I'm downloading the update. Hey, here's the file I'm extracting. Hey, here's the files I'm copying. Okay, we're cool. And that's all it did. And specifically, you may have caught an issue there, the only feedback it gave while downloading was, I'm downloading. It didn't tell you how much is downloaded or how much there was left, and that was mostly because I had no clue how to get that information. I do know how to do that now, though, because unrelated things that I was doing, I was like, oh, cool, that's how you do it. And I was like, wait, I could probably get that information. Answer, yes, I could get that information. It was at my fingertips the whole time. And I didn't realize it until now, but I was like, okay. So yeah, now there's an actual progress bar that will show you how slowly it's downloading the file instead of like, maybe I'm downloading, maybe I'm hanged, I don't know. That was the first thing I did. Obviously then cross-platform compatibility. I was like, yeah, this is gonna go on everything. It's gonna be like modern day. It's all Java shit anyway. Why not? We can write once, run anywhere. That's the goal, right? And that was kind of the goal. There was some operating system specific stuff I had to do, but it wasn't that bad. So yeah. Then I was like, okay, well, I should make this more of a proper like version management tool instead of the screen is giving me a little bit of annoyance right now. No, that's why. Fixed. No, it's not. Shit. Oh well. Anyway, so I was like, yeah, because currently you don't have a choice in what you're downloading, or the old one was you didn't have a choice in what you were getting. It was just whatever was like the latest provided links. So instead I created a system where you actually have an option. On Windows, for some reason, the UI is a bit buggy, but I'm using built-in Java libraries to generate this UI. So if it's buggy, if a section of the UI isn't showing up, it's not my fault, because, I don't know, it's Java's fault, probably. And in fact, the on Linux, it works just fine. Like, the part of the UI that isn't showing up on Windows shows up on Linux, so I don't know. Anyhow, that aside, so yeah, if you know where to click on Windows, I mean, it's where it says the version number, you can choose from a provided list of versions, which will slowly grow as more versions get released. And it will be able to intelligently, based off the version you select, find the appropriate download version for your operating system and other installed options. That was one of those fun things that was a very good feature that I added. I also added some more pre-downloading options. So obviously on Windows, there's still the option of whether or not you want the Java embedded environment to be downloaded or not. So I made that just like a checkbox. You could decide whether or not. The current versions of the game, so the latest version, which is not the version which is the version you'd be updating to, so the moment versions you're updating from wouldn't actually have this feature. But new versions of the game, versions after this, will be able to take advantage of this feature. They will be able to, there is now a way for them to communicate to the thing saying, hey, yes, I did come bundled or I did not come bundled. It will default to you came bundled with Java because that's the we know it works state. We know what works state. That's a good state to be in. But yes, it will tell the thing whether or not, so that it will be automatically checked or unchecked based off of whether you do or do not need to use the pre-Java installation version. Of course, it is only available on Windows because on the other platforms, I don't even fuck around with like the idea of let's maybe shrink the download size by not bundling Java, because from my experience on Linux and macOS, I don't know how, like, even if I've had Java 17 as the only installed Java, it'll still somehow fuck it up. So I'm just like, you know what? Embedding Java, it will always work. I'm not even going to fuck around with the other ones to make sure it works. Have fun. So yeah, that's what I ended up doing. But the other option that you're presented before you start the download of the new version is whether or not you want to do a clean install. So the way it worked beforehand is it would just straight up copy into and just end up replacing any files that changed in your game's installation directory. It wouldn't remove anything that was there. It would only effectively remove it if it got replaced by something new. And if there's a file there that could cause an issue with the new things for some reason, but it wasn't done properly, it would definitely, it wouldn't remove potentially damaging files. So it'd be like, who cares? And I definitely think I've had an issue with the Java installation, especially at that point. So what did I do at that point? Oh yeah, so the clean installation button will just, before it actually copies the new files over to the directory, it'll just completely delete everything in the directory if you have that option pressed. So if you're storing files there, remove them before you do a clean install, because it will delete everything. That was that. What next? Alright. Other improvements that I made to the software is it will no longer just leave its temporary files sitting on the disk to be hopefully overwritten in the next update. Because that was the thing, I didn't actually have it delete any of the temporary files, because it's got the file that it downloaded, it's got to store that, it's got the extraction before it copies it over to the new place. Also didn't delete that, so you'd have a second copy of the game just sitting on your system. That could also get fucked up by updates partially overwriting it. That would be fun. So yeah, I fixed all of that shit. What else did I fix? Oh yeah, so I think that was most of what I actually did to improve the game. I did something else. Oh yeah, so then we can talk about the cross-platform compatibility, because one of the biggest, the biggest hurdle to the cross-platform compatibility with this is that the actual name of the file that you run to run the game is different on every operating system, because the extensions used, or lack thereof in the case of Linux, differs compared to everything else, because in the initial extracted files, I don't know how deep into the extracted folder structure the actual game is, because yeah, sometimes when you compress it, it'll go like a separate folder. It'll like create another folder inside of the compressed folder, which is the folder everything's in, and sometimes it'll just be all your files are directly within the compressed folder, no subfolders. So in order to account for that, I have a thing that will recursively search through the folders in the output of the compression to find the actual executable file. Now on Windows, and this is mainly the reason why it was Windows only in the past. In Windows, it's obvious because you just find the .exe, the skinnyman.exe file, and it will work. But on Linux, Linux and macOS, it is of course different. On macOS, there is no file extension, which is fun. You got to make sure you're actually on the executable file, which I think it does do, but maybe it's not the right way. Make sure you're not getting that file confused with the directory as well, because that could also happen with the Linux system. And then on macOS, it's like a .app file, but it's not actually a file, it's actually a folder. So that's fun. So yeah, I had to account for that stuff. And then in the process of testing that this did properly account for all stuff, I found something fun. One specific version, I forget which version, but it's one of the recent versions for Linux. The executable file is actually named slightly differently to all the other files and all the other executables on Linux. I think it had a dash instead of an underscore in it, and it also may or may not have been missing an N. That was annoying, so I had to put specific cases in the updater to handle that specific version, and in the future I gotta try to make sure that the version is not misspelled. So that's fun. Then also while creating the list of here's all the downloads for the various versions, I also found something else kind of interesting. One of the I actually missed a couple versions back actually. I missed the macOS download, and there's no actual version of the game available for macOS. I somehow uploaded the macOS release of the level creator for that version instead of the actual macOS release. And because I don't have old releases of the game, especially for macOS, sitting around, yeah, that version of macOS just doesn't have the game, and that's fun. Now, here's the thing, though. You may have suddenly thought of something, be like, hang on a second. I thought you had said that this had only been extended to Linux, and well, that is true, because I had originally planned to just extend it to everything, macOS included. But when I went to test it on macOS, first of all, the virtual machine I was using was being slow as shit when I don't remember being this slow in the past, so that was making my testing already more strenuous than it had to be. But on top of that, it turns out that the copied version of the files macOS just refused to run it. Like, I'm pretty sure everything was intact, it's there, I just tried to run it, and macOS was like, nah, you can't run this. Contact your administrator. And I'm like, why? And it's like, I don't know. I'm like, I am the administrator. So, oh, you can't run it still. I was like, okay, run terminal commands, because I looked this up online. It still didn't run it. And so I was like, you know what? Screw this. It's probably some sort of application signing problem, and fuck you, Apple, for that being the case. But, yeah, that is why the updater is not on macOS, because if you're on macOS, your system, realistically on macOS, it needs to just work. If there's any platform where you have to figure it out yourself as to why it's not working, that would be Linux. And I actually made Linux potentially a little bit better by not necessarily requiring them to do that. But on macOS, it's absolutely a no-go for that. And even if I can't even get it to work, well, I shouldn't ship this. So I did not ship it for macOS because I could not get it to work. And it's all Apple's fault, probably. No, it is their fault, because there's no reason your operating system shouldn't be able to just run shit if the format's invalid. I know there's malware and shit, but it's like that's gonna stop anyone who knows what they're doing. It isn't. People who know what they're doing know how they get around your stupid little shits. It's people like me who don't know what they're doing but have legitimate software who are going to be affected by your shit. Anyhow, the final feature that I added to the thing, which was like a very last-minute addition that I decided I needed to add, was oh yes, the ability for the updater to actually launch the game once it's done. Because before it didn't do that, it just said, hey, do it yourself. Which was great. Now this was actually, I believe, something that came out of me making sure that the game side of things actually worked on Linux. Because obviously the game has to download and then launch it. And actually, one of the issues I came across at that point was permissions, because by default on Linux, whenever files are generated, they have like no ability to be executed, which is kind of a pain in the ass, to be fair. Especially when you're downloading a program with the intent of running it, like say an updater program. So I had to figure out how to get the game to correctly give permissions to the files, which was a very big pain, because I looked up how to do it online, and the first few methods I tried didn't work. I ended up, I believe, just doing something similar to how I eventually launch it, which is like make a whole process builder system, and then instead of just launching it, because I can't directly launch it because I will get an error with the permissions, you're not allowed to do this, I instead just put the chmod command into a process builder and then just have that run to set the permissions allowing it to execute. And then after I do that, then I launch it. So in the aftermath of this, I was like, oh, well, hang on, I could actually do this in the level creator where I have that, not the level creator, the updater. I could do this in the updater. And in the updater, I could just, once it's done, I could actually have it launch the game instead of telling you to do it yourself. Because why not? And so, I did that. I added a button at the end and you're done, click the button to launch. Very convenient. And it also has the added benefit of when you do that on Linux, it will also set the file permissions of the game to be executed. Because by default, their files that have been downloaded, created, whatever, they do not have permission to execute. So you'd have to re-give those files permissions manually if you don't press the launch button. But that's Linux for you. You should be prepared for that if you're using Linux. But yeah, that's I believe all the changes I made specifically to the updater. And that was what I was doing actually at the beginning of this week, because I got randomly inspired to do that. And then yeah, that was what I spent a good chunk of the week doing. But yes, there's all this. Long story to say, new update out for my game, link in the description to the website where you can check it out. And yeah, there's also a bunch of hopefully quality of life fixes that I've included in that update. Ooh, there's also I also realized something. Actually, no, I've seen this weird thing on GitHub when it comes to the actual repository for my game. Yeah, it's for some reason hiding the previous release of the now previous release of the game 0.80. When it was the most recent release, on the side of the main page where it said releases, you could click there and you'd be taken to the page for the release. But for some reason, it's not displayed in the list of all other releases. And after this newest release, which is in that list, the previous release is just not there anymore. If you go into the URL bar and change the tag to actually be the tag for the release, it is still there. But it's for some reason not in the public list, and I have no idea why. I'm just assuming it's some bug on GitHub's end, but I was noticing this on some devices. Yeah, I was noticing this on some devices, in one of the club rooms at my school here. I've gone to the GitHub page for my game on those computers, and the latest release at that time just wasn't there for some reason, and I was just like, okay, it should be there. I don't know. I assumed it was, I don't know, some weird Firefox Linux bug, but today I was in a different computer lab at school printing out a fucking thick packet of classwork shit for the semester in physics stuff, and I'm And while it was taking 7 years to print, because it's like 50 pages of shit that I had to print out, I was like, huh, you know, I'm just gonna go look at my game or whatever here, you know, maybe try running it on these computers. And then I was like, and then when I went there, I went to look at the release page. Again, 080 just wasn't there on the releases list. I'm like, what? Why? Like, I typed in the URL for it, and the release does still exist on GitHub. It's just not in the public list. I'm gonna probably end up putting a link to it in the current release, in the latest release. I'm gonna like put a link, like, here's the previous release. No idea why it's not showing up on GitHub here. In case anyone wants to download it. But like, I mean, you could also use the new updater to download it, as that has actually been set to properly work with the new releases. And so, if you did want to download it for Windows or Linux, you can use the updater, and as I said, it automatically detects your operating system and such, and will download the correct versions for you. Hopefully, actually, that is. Because, I mean, I assume that things are pretty straightforward with how Java can detect the operating system. Because I have, you know, tested this shit on Windows. Actually, I just talked about how like Java can view what operating system you're on. On Windows, I checked it out. The operating system name field specifically says Windows, like the actual physical operating system on. So Windows 10, Windows 11, it actually says that. So I was like, okay, if the operating system contains Windows, you're on Windows. For Linux, when I tested on a Ubuntu installation. The OS was just Linux, just straight up Linux, which was convenient. So it's like, okay, if it contains Linux, it's Linux. But I only tested it on one distribution. I couldn't help but feel that there's probably a distribution out there where it doesn't say Linux, it says My Crummy Distribution, version 36 or whatever. And I'd have no idea that you're on Linux. So I also made the default situation like, hey, if you don't know what it is, or if you didn't fill in any of these previous categories, you're on Linux. Because that's most likely the case. And then I did also, again, because this was before I found out that it really didn't work on macOS, I was trying to make it work. So for macOS, it does, the actual identifier string for macOS is Mac space OS space X, which is annoying. But I'd originally set it to macOS one word. So it was like, okay, well that's a simple thing. I just, you know, fix that. If it contains Mac, it's a Mac, right? But then it's also like, oh, come on, Apple. This is not the 10th version of macOS anymore. You can call it something different. You don't, or you just don't include the X in anything. There basically is no macOS other than macOS X anymore, which is not even a specific version. It's just anything after macOS 9. So yeah, that's you know, the experience that I had with that stuff. Yeah, then I've also, actually something else fun that I've actually done relatively recently. Actually, no, this was a few months ago, but I'll still talk about it. I may have talked about this before, as I was trying to actually, because the game is made in processing. I tried to make some contributions to the actual processing project itself as well. I've noticed some things, you know, that I think I could improve or do that I kind of want to be in processing. So the first one, which isn't relevant to the story I want to tell here, but it's something I've done nonetheless, was I created a way for you to select by which method your images get upscaled. Or downscaled, for that matter, when you resize them. Because currently in processing, the interpolation mode for image resizing is locked at bilinear, I believe. There's no way for you to actually change it within processing itself. That you just have to deal with that, which, I mean, it's fine if you're working with normal high-res images and want them to look relatively good when they're scaled. But if you want to build a pixel art game in processing, that's great. So instead of that, so I went through and figured out that the library that processing is actually using to do the image resizing already supports multiple different interpolation modes. So I just went through and made assistance where you could have an extra parameter on the resize method that actually allowed you to select which mode you used. And I've pull requested that. No pull requests have been accepted in a long time, so I'm guessing they just haven't gotten around to working on the actual project in a while. So that's in the pipes. Hopefully. Hang on, I just need to make sure that I actually dug out the center here. Good, I did, okay. The other thing I did, which is a little bit more consequential for what I want to talk about today, is the, crap, what is it called? Oh yes, the icon, or the application's icon upon export, because on Windows and Mac OS, executable files actually, have a little icon image to go with them so that hey, that's this file. Linux doesn't have that for some reason, which is kind of a missed opportunity, because adding, well, I know Linux is, I guess, primarily not a graphical user OS, but still having a standard way for desktop environments to be able to display an icon for an executable file would still be good, because other operating systems actually do that, like Windows and Mac OS. Anyhow, for Windows and Mac OS, where you can have an icon set, processing will always, when you export, just use its default one. Until now, the only way you could, there are only two real ways to change that. The first one is, after you've actually done the export, use a third-party program like Resource Hacker on Windows, or I guess just opening the folder and changing it on Mac OS, would be, that's the first way you could change whatever the icon of your thing is. Or the second way is you could just go into processing's files, the files you downloaded when you download processing, and just swap out the reference files that it uses for those things. But both of these situations have a downside. The first way is kind of hackery and might mess with application signing, especially on Mac OS, if that's the thing you're concerned about. And the second way, well, that's great if you only ever develop one program that you're ever going to want to export on processing, but if you develop anything else that you're going to want to have an export for, you probably don't want that to have the icon of your other thing, unless you do. And so swapping that out all the time is just kind of a hassle, because you got to remember to do it. It's all the way there. So neither of these are a great solution. So I set out to actually make a good solution to this that would be easy for people to use. And so what I decided is there is now a file that is generally used in processing called sketch.properties. Its primary purpose right now is to, well, it has two primary purposes. First of all, tell processing which mode the sketch is in, so it's like Java, Android, P5, that. And second of all, if your sketch is in a name, or if the folder the sketch is in is named differently than the main file, tell it what the actual main file for the sketch is supposed to be. Currently, those are the two things that sketch.property does. And other modes might actually append more information in them. Those are the two main things it universally does. So I decided to leverage this file to be able to do the icon system. So you could just set you could just put some text in this file to set whatever the icon's going to be for your exported app. So and while I was digging into the code to figure out how this whole thing works and how I could leverage it leverage the systems in place for this file to actually read in and then use for exporting the application with your custom icon, I found out that it interestingly supports already supports operating specific depending. Oh, hello there, Mr. Chatter, which I am. Oh yeah, right now I'm on the ball with chat. Yes. Where was I? Yeah, so it already had baked-in support for operating system-specific properties. So you could just append a dot and then the name of whatever operating system you wanted it to apply for to the end, and it would automatically choose the one for the specific operating system and set that as like the active version of that property, which I thought was super cool, considering that Windows and macOS use different icon formats. You're going to have to set different files for them. I wouldn't have to name two separate properties. I could just name it, I could just read the one property icon, and then it would figure out whether or not you meant the the Windows or macOS icon option, which was pretty cool. And I got it to work like that. You just say like icon.windows equals, and then, relative file path. And it will, when it's building the executable, it will now include whatever the icon file that you referenced is, which is, pretty neat. And so I've also pull requested that if you want to check that out on GitHub. But while I was, generating the latest release for my game on the macOS, interestingly, while I was trying to get the macOS version exported, I ran into an issue, which is that I was getting a concurrent modification exception when I tried to open the sketch on macOS, which was entirely confusing to me. I'm like, what the hell does that even mean? Is macOS just being dumb and not letting me open this all of a sudden? Because I wouldn't put it past, given the given what I was talking about earlier with the issues that I've had for what I was having with macOS, I was like, oh, come on, Apple, are you screwing with me again? It turned out no, actually. It was not Apple. I just happened to run into it on macOS. It's actually an issue with the way that processing tried to handle the multi-operating system version of their properties file. So looking into it further, the issue is that they used a hash map to actually store the different properties. So you could, say, give me icon, and it'll give you whatever the icon is. But the way that they sort out the actual operating system dependent version is they just loop through all the items in the hash map. And if the current item contains your platform specific extension, then just add a new item to the hash map, which is that item without this platform specific extension. Which on the surface, this seems like it works, but it turns out that this only works if the item that you're currently iterating on, or the current item, is the last item in the map. It does not work if it's literally any other position in the map, because when you try to add something to the hash map and then you try to iterate to the next element, Java will give you a concurrent modification exception, because of course it will, because you've changed this stuff in the hash maps while you've been iterating through it, and now it doesn't know what to or where to iterate to next. And mind you, this has nothing to do with iron. I was using the system as, it was currently built. So I just found this bug, because to be clear, I was kind of surprised that processing had this feature built into the property system, because it's not currently used anywhere before I decided to do what I did. So clearly no one really tested it to make sure it actually worked properly and didn't give any unforeseen errors, like something like a concurrent modification exception. So I think it was it yesterday? It may have been yesterday, actually. I actually went and fixed updated my pull request to now have a fix for that error on it. So, hopefully when that gets pulled into the project, it will no longer have that error. If you do try to do this. And to be fair, this is a bug that actually existed and was missed because they apparently didn't test their own stuff. And I did actually verify that this was in fact a bug and not just the way I did stuff by just putting junk data in the file and just appending some properties to it. And if it wasn't the last one, it was like, or appending operating specific ones to it, and it's like, hey, it's not the last one, you're dead. This is also how I found out that apparently processing will scan through all the sketches in your sketchbook, loading their sketch.properties when you boot it up. And I don't know what with it, but it loads them in. So when I was testing this, I just had the sketch I was testing directly in my sketchbook. So I tried to open processing and I got an error being like, something went wrong. It was the concurrent modification exception. Why am I in here? I need glowstone now. Yeah, that was, I guess, mostly stuff I did this week. Mind you, I did the icon thing a while back. Why am I coming in here? That's not my storage system. This is my storage system. And this is glowstone. Bum, bum. Oh, well, I don't have that much inventory space. I'll have to come back when I need more. Yeah, that was some stuff that took me away from doing stuff in Minecraft this past week. Oh boy. So, alright, getting back over here. So, let's see, other stuff to talk about. Well, Hermitcraft Season 10 is starting tomorrow, which is obviously what Coolcraft is supposedly loosely based off of. At least it was the inspiration for it. I guess, as much as you can base a general survival SMP off of other people's survival SMPs, but I do believe that there's a strong bit of inspiration in the way I build my videos from that sort of stuff. And yeah, based off what I've seen on Twitter, it's looking like there's some interesting stuff going down in just the first episode. So that's going to be interesting to see. Let's see, what else is going on? Super Bowl is coming soon, and I actually, specifically I'm going to throw this programming notice out. I will not be streaming on the day of the Super Bowl. First of all, because everyone's probably going to be watching the Super Bowl. And second of all, because whatever I'm doing for the prank this year, I don't want to stream it, because then Jared E. Cool could just look at the stream and see what it is. So, I guess Tyler could also do that. So, I don't want that to happen, so I'm not going to be streaming on the Super Bowl. I've suddenly run out of things to talk about. Oh, got a second for me to, sit back and breathe. Oh, yeah. Something else I could talk about. So, I missed a couple stone blocks here. So actually, something that I realized, I kind of was realizing as I was printing that stuff out in the computer lab, was that the school, I remember from the past that the school's antivirus is particularly pissy about any executable file that was downloaded off the internet, which includes my game from the last time I tried to actually run it. Which is kind of a problem, because it'll just delete the executable instead of allowing it to run. But I was realizing that, and as I was downloading, I was like, I probably won't be able to use this because the antivirus will just delete it. And I was like, I did just leave before I ended up actually attempting anything because my print had finished. But I believe the way I got around this in the past was basically using the reasoning that, well, obviously there's computer science stuff that's being done here at the school. So people are obviously going to be, or it's obviously intended that people can compile and make their own executable files on these computers. That's how do programming like C and stuff, which is definitely something that happens here. So clearly the antivirus will probably not think too much of running an executable file which was created on this computer by a program on this computer. So if I had a program on this computer that was already allowed to run that could create an executable file which just so happened to be capable of running my game, that would probably not set off the antivirus. And also, Java is installed on these computers. At least from my checks, Java 11 is. So, if I just, have a Java program which will create an executable file that can run my game on this computer, it will probably be fine, similar to how the updater does it. And I believe the last time I tried it, it actually did when I just downloaded the game through the, through just a Java program that was running on the computer. It didn't actually care where it came from, and I was just able to run it. I didn't have time to do anything like that because, I had to, get going, finish doing homework and shit. And I guess I could talk about the talk a bit more about the nut job professor that I have today. He seems like a nice enough guy, to be fair. He's old, so that's probably why he's a nut job, to be fair. But he seems like a pretty nice guy otherwise. He just has a really weird and unorthodox way of doing a lot of stuff. But yeah, he was, from at least one of the classes this week, it was, I think the first class this week, I was relatively actually engaged with the class. I was like, oh yeah, this is some cool stuff. He was actually showing us some programming stuff, so I was like, oh, this is interesting. But then in the other class this week, I was just completely zoning out, being like, oh gosh, this stuff is so boring. He's just talking at us. To be fair, I don't think that's his fault. The material was actually very boring in my opinion. And the homeworks that he's been throwing us have been weirdly simple, and although his directions aren't the most clear, a lot of the homework directions are just here's examples of or actually, at least here's a little bit of example stuff, but like here's just a whole bunch of other stuff that you'll notice as you learn through doing this assignment. It's like, okay, cool. That doesn't really tell me what I do or don't have to do. Like, I think the most recent assignment that we're up to was just like, yeah, make a thing. Actually, no, that wasn't the most recent. That was like the previous one. It was just like, hey, make a thing that just has like these functions. And that's it. It's like, really? That's all you want to do? And he was spending a extra while at the end of class talking about like, oh, make sure you don't fall into the trap of not doing the math correctly and just... I'm just like skipping a step and I was like, okay, cool. Just thinking about it, I was like, yeah, no, I did fine here. This is fine. It's all fine. This is fine, 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 fine. Oh yeah, and actually another thing that I guess I can do here. So while I was doing some testing for the updater, or for the new version of the updater game, obviously I was trying to test, see like, okay, what does various things respond with when I try to check what operating system it's on, or this is in Java. And so I wanted to try to check on the server that this guy has set up for class, because, you know, if he just has a straight up Linux server set up that we can just connect to and log into, and we can just do whatever on there. And it has a version of Java installed. I think it is Java 8 though, so it's kind of old. But I was like, okay. But I could still just like copy the contents of my class file over here, and I did that, and it wasn't able to find it for some reason. It's the same directory. Here's the name of it. Nope, still wasn't able to find it. So it's like, okay, maybe he doesn't properly have Java installed or whatever. So okay, I'll compile this Java file first, and then I'll run it. There's no Java compiler there. It's like, oh, he probably only has a JRE installed, not a JDK, which is kind of annoying. I don't think he's teaching the Java course this semester though, but still. So I was like, okay, maybe that's not necessarily what I should do. Okay, let me try. Okay, maybe I'll just try typing this in. I'll try opening the Java shell, which is actually a thing. It's like idle for Python, but it's Java instead. And I screwed around with it a little bit on my own computers before, just trying to get them to do self-referential stuff that would cause problems. But yeah, that also doesn't exist because that's probably a JDK feature. Which then had me very confused as to what was going on. It's like, how are they going to set this up? Why is it set up this way? Yeah, this guy also has a very... I mean, he's particular. I'll say that about, like, the software that he wants people to, like, use. Like, he specifically has an issue with the command line text editor Nano for some reason. It's like, oh, you shouldn't be using Nano. You should be using VI or Vim. Vim is so much better. Like, oh, you can't edit large fonts. Oh, Vim is better. It's like, okay. Well, one, I don't care. I'm going to do as much as I can on a graphical text editor that actually has features. And also, I'm just going to use something simple that displays the controls on screen if I'm on the command line, because I don't want to have to like go and remember all the Vim stuff if there's like, am I in editing mode? Because my biggest problem with Vim, I'm sure it's fine, whatever, but my biggest problem with it is that it's completely user unfriendly. It doesn't tell the user what the controls are. Even the manual in Linux, you know, the command line manual, that tells you at the bottom of the screen, here's your basic controls, here's how you leave. Vim VI does not do that. It's just like, haha, you should know this, loser. You're not a real developer unless you know these key sequences, which you would, unless you look it up online, you have no way of knowing that. I don't know why he's so particular about it, but he just is. He's like, oh, Nano is for losers. Oh no, why do they only teach that here? I don't know. It's weird. Anyhow. But yeah, graphical text editors are almost always going to be better for most. Oh yeah, he's also. I know he's old. He's worked here for like over 30 years, I think. So, wait, what's that? The 90s? Probably before that when he started working here? So yeah, Windows was like, not really was not really that much of an operating system compared to what it is now back then. So it's like, yeah, I mean, okay, I get it. Maybe back in the 90s, you know, when you're developing stuff on a computer from the era, you probably would be expected, especially if it's like a Linux computer, to be using the command line to do your development work, because graphical environments, especially I think on Linux back then, were not really the most common things in the world. But this is 2024. The number of jobs that exist out there where you're not going to be having access to a graphical IDE or at least notepad from Windows to do all your editing is going to be basically none. I mean, I'm sure there's maintaining old systems where you do have to do it all in the command line. They do exist. I'm sure they do. But 99% of programming jobs today are going to be done in a graphical development environment. Probably. So, I mean, cool, I can know how to use it, but I'm probably not going to use it. Plus, like, I can tell you this. VI, Vim, whatever, does not hold a fucking candle to JetBrains IDEs. Like, there's just no way. Because JetBrains IDEs manage to be both built for developers and also incredibly user-friendly. Unlike Vim, VI Vim, which is just built for developers. It dropped the whole user-friendly part of things. It dropped that facade a long time ago. But like, it is possible to make really useful software that is also very user-friendly. Oh, okay. Although I feel like that's sometimes a philosophy that Linux just likes to ignore, or that the Linux people just like to ignore. It's like, no, it doesn't need to be user-friendly. That's wasted space and time. You should be putting that time into more things for those who know what they're doing. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you're a loser, and you shouldn't be on the computer. Especially not a sophisticated computer that runs the Linux. Wait, you want to be able to just click on a program to run it? No, that's stupid. You should have to open a terminal, type out the name of the program, and then, you know, hopefully you did it right, and then it'll run. But you can't close that terminal window. You have to leave that clutter on your screen, by the way. Because that's how you should be computing. Meanwhile, 99% of people who use Windows or Mac OS are like, what the hell? This thing's unusable. It's broken. To be fair, I have had a lot of experiences with Linux where it is just like it just completely doesn't work for whatever reason, and it throws a cryptic error anytime I try to do anything. It's like, why aren't you working? Error. It's like, okay, I tried to install something. Nope, sorry, error. Your driver, the drivers for this device are. Well, the available drivers for this device are from a poor version, like 3 years old, so... No, sorry, you're getting an error. And now you can't install anything else because this driver installation didn't go properly. You're just going to get an error every single time that you try to install something. Happy computing! That's my experience with some Linux machines. Some of the other Linux machines, like, you know, the server that this thing runs on, they generally haven't had problems. Mind you, they are on modern hardware that is still currently supported, and I'm not doing anything really graphical on them because, well, it's a Minecraft server. It doesn't necessarily need to be graphical, although the ability to have multiple terminals on the same screen in use is also quite useful sometimes. It's also significantly easier to manage shit in a graphical environment than it is in a command line environment. Also, in order to like be running the Minecraft servers properly, you do, unless you're using the remote console, which I guess that is a thing, but in order to manage them and, you know, move files around in the world, I generally do like a graphical environment for that, because it's otherwise a real pain to actually do that. This is, of course, Of course, there's also stuff like NBT Explorer, which is a purely graphical program. That's why I like it when, like, there are, teachers, professors that, they prefer, Linux or whatever as their preferred operating system. But they know the reality of the world. That, Windows, Mac OS, these operating systems exist. And people will probably be using them. And you will probably be using them. But that's okay. Because we live in a world where we can, account for that. We can do stuff with that and make sure, teaching that, the stuff is fine. This is maybe how it should work. But you might also have it working like this. Which is how it should work. Actually, I specifically had a professor who was like, well, I mean, he doesn't really prefer developing on Windows, like, at all. Like, obviously, he prefers, Linux or whatever, but he was telling us, like, well, Windows is a great operating system. I mean, like 80% of the population, when they're using a desktop computer, they're using Windows, which is great. The fact that, like, that's such a big user base, so developing for Windows is not like a waste of time or anything. It's just Microsoft, or at least the kind of hodgepile way Windows is created, isn't necessarily the best for development. To be fair, it's still leagues better than what Apple does. At least in my opinion is. Because, I mean, Microsoft, there's the developers, quote video from Steve Ballmer. That is kind of true. Although, compared to Linux, which is specifically just made by developers, which is probably why it's, a bit better for development. Windows had that, the developers, they want to do stuff, but you also got that corporate meddling, the marketing department, you get the bigwigs at the top who want these specific things done. You have the marketing department who wants it to look a certain way, and you just have, like, the general design people who are like, well, but it should be designed like that. Those things are not important. People, I guess user focused, which, I mean, it's not terrible, but when you're slowly layering the operating system onto itself and you have such an extreme commitment to backwards compatibility that despite the fact that you don't support 16-bit applications on Windows 11, Windows 11 still has to support the various some of the various ways that programs back in the DOS days would communicate with the fucking parallel port on the motherboard. No motherboards have that run Windows 11, or at least are supposed to be. But because of this extreme-ass backwards compatibility, you still cannot have... Oh, where's this chest I'm looking for? Here it is. You still cannot name a file COM in Windows. Because of this extreme-ass backwards compatibility. Which sometimes, that's, a good thing. To be fair, it's a good thing. It has meant that, as long as you didn't write an app like absolute fucking dog crap, which if you used a modern-day compiler, it's probably never going to be an issue. As long as you didn't write your application like dog crap, and it's 32-bit at least, it will probably still run just fine on modern Windows. Obviously, DOS, 16-bit apps, you need DOSBox or whatever. Because, the stuff can get a little bit murky back then. It's not exactly the same. But, the backwards compatibility for Windows apps is just actually quite good. Especially when you compare it to Mac OS and certain distributions of Linux. Because, like, obviously on Mac OS, it's like, hey, you compiled this program on a version of Mac OS that's 1 year older than the current version? Ha! Yeah, why would you ever think that would work? Come on, man. That's not how things work around here. That's the Apple approach, that backwards compatibility is just basically a nice to have, but not necessary for literally anything. Then you have the Linux approach, where despite the fact that the official, Linus Torvalds motto is never, if a kernel update breaks the user's program, it's not, the program's not broken, it's a kernel bug, that sort of thing. That may be true at the, the Linux, the main core Linux kernel, but that's but once you get into various distributions of the kernel, that's almost never the case, and quite often being, in one newer version will completely break a lot of applications, or even your entire system for that matter, for no apparent reason. Because despite the fact that, I mean, Linux, it's all like Linux is way too loosely connected realistically for it to be possible for it to actually have that trickle down, despite the fact that, Linus Torvalds at the top may want backwards compatibility to be most generally a thing that's available. It often can be not. Oh yeah, I also have another story about, doing stuff with the relevant to this class with the nutjob professor. So for one of the homework assignments, I'd written the program on my computer and tested it using Windows Subsystem for Linux, because, that's the easiest way for me to test it. Everything worked there, compiled there, fine. I moved the executable file, the binary blob, over to their server and, to turn it in or whatever. And, I just wanted to test it there, and it didn't run because it required some weird library thing. It was like, what? The WSL I'm running is Ubuntu. This is an actual Ubuntu. I've installed the compiler from, I think, apt or whatever. How does this, a reasonably up-to-date installation of Ubuntu, not able to execute this shit? To be fair, Windows does have similar problems where, certain stupid standard library DLL not found. That is, to be clear, an actual issue that does exist on Windows as well. Unless you're using the Microsoft Visual Studio... unless you're using the Microsoft Visual Studio compiler, and you're not using any of the Visual Studio redistributables, Visual C# redistributables, whatever, unless that's the case, you're probably going to need to bundle some sort of third-party DLL from your compiler with your actual code to be able to, run it on whatever. Or to be able to actually run it, which is, a big challenge for actually distributing your code in a reasonable manner. And the annoying part is, compared to using a third-party compiler like a G++ compiler for Windows, a third-party compiler, or the Visual Studio compiler, is a little bit different. The syntax for the compile commands first are actually completely different, because instead of, just using the G++ or whatever on Windows, Visual Studio uses CL as the name of the executable, because logic or something like that. Also, it doesn't have the same input parameters. You can't just -O to create an output file, because it won't pay attention to that. That's deprecated. It'll just create the output file named whatever it thinks it should be named. Oh wait, also, you wanted to use a dash because that's what everyone else uses for command line parameters? No. This is Windows. We use slashes for command line parameters here. I mean, if you do a dash, it'll just translate that for you, but it doesn't want you to use those. Also, what was it? You wanted to name something short? Well, fuck you, because that is, in some standard library file, defined as a char. So it may work on another operating system for you to name your integer short or whatever for whatever reason. But if you bring that over to the Visual Studio compiler, you're going to get compilation error, because int char is not valid. I think it was short, at least. Actually, no, it's not short. Short's another thing. Small. Small, I think, is what it was. I think medium and large are also defined as chars in Microsoft's spec, which is, definitely not annoying at all. There's no problem with that, right? It's not like you would ever want to name anything yourself that. Yes, okay, this is correct. Okay. See, and Microsoft's not perfect with their compiler shenanigans, but I guess one of the beauties of Windows, and I guess, Linux doing so too, is you don't have to use Microsoft's compiler to make your applications on Windows. You can use any compiler you want, and it will probably work as long as the correct DLLs and whatnot are present. Apple, you are basically screwed. If you don't use their compiler, well, there's no guarantee your code will work. Even if you do, there's no guarantee it will work the next time you try to run it, or if you try to give it to a friend. if I made it clear that I don't really like it, if I made it clear that I think Apple's positions, especially on macOS, are stupid. Oh yeah, I could also, I guess, talk about an extension to what shitting on Apple. Their stupid policies for the new EU stuff. Like, first of all, I thought they were just straight up supposed to allow sideloading, not like other app stores that are still basically beholden to Apple. Which is terrible. It's just like, really, Apple? Like, do you want to drive developers away from your platform? Because this is how you're going to drive developers away from your platform, by just doing shit like this. I mean, I know that in America, I know that these changes only affect the EU. They're never coming to America because oh, this thing's running here. Yeah, they're never coming to America because we don't have the law here for that. It's only the EU, and they want to keep a stranglehold on their monopoly because it is basically a monopoly. They're proving that they want to be a monopoly in this situation, unfairly leveraging their position to be able to say screw you to all the competitors. Why was I talking about? What was it? Oh yeah. But still, it's just not, and I think like the people who are in charge of, assuring compliance to these new regulations in the EU have effectively said that, no, Apple's things are not compliant. We will be dealing with them. But they didn't explicitly say it. I think they said something like, yeah, we are aware of the situation. Or something incredibly vague as to like, yeah, we will not tolerate attempts to circumvent the rules or whatever. Oh, hang on, this should be a... Which I think is basically code for, yeah, Apple, you're fucked it. Apple, we're not gonna stand for your bullshit. Yeah, you're gonna have to... What am I doing? I still need the wool. You're gonna have to actually, figure it out. But so yeah. I mean, Apple has been basically being an asshole here, because let's see, what other things did they do? Besides this whole monopolistic thing. Alright, the whole like stupid Vision Pro situation. I honestly haven't seen any of that stuff because like, one, I'm very far off from doing VR, and if I'm gonna do a VR, I'm not doing Apple VR, which costs 10 times as much as Facebook's VR. And to be fair, I probably wouldn't go with Facebook either. I'd probably go with like Valve or something like that. But like, geez, I would actually consider going Facebook over Apple. Which is insane for me to say, but geez. Also, the funny part about them pushing away developers from, especially their mobile platforms, and they're not really doing themselves any favors on desktop with, again, the way that they run, being able to make applications that can actually run on macOS. Or the funny part about them doing their shenanigans on mobile is that a lot of the major apps for like iPad apps and whatnot that could run on the Vision Pro with very little modification have just been like, yeah, no, we're not going to be on the Vision Pro, you idiots. Which is hilarious, because it's just like, at the same time Apple's wanting people to develop apps for this thing so people will actually buy it, the companies are like, the companies that make the apps are like, no. For the 10 people who are going to buy this thing, we don't think it's worth it. To be fair, it's just very consistent with how general app development goes, because especially with Google, hasn't really... There's issues with YouTube for foldable devices, or so I've heard. I obviously don't have a foldable device. I'm a broke college student. But it's not in Google's or YouTube's priority to fix said issues because of the dozens, literally, of people who actually have a folded device and are actually high enough up on the YouTube game to actually make literal use of these features. A similar thing could really be said about the Apple Vision Pro, which is going to sell significantly less units. Okay, well, I'm going to say significantly less units. It's sold out. They sold out their pre-orders. Idiots. Anyhow. the user base for the Vision Pro is going to be significantly smaller than foldables. And with the added complexity of being a VR situation, yeah, it just does not make sense. The potential revenue for developing this platform, which is stupid expensive, and it's probably going to be a pain to develop for and require a lot of work, compared to the possible return that they could get for actually doing the development work, it just does not make sense. Even if iPad apps will supposedly work completely fine on this thing, it just does not make sense for them to actually do this development until there's a good user base on these devices that could actually make them some money. But wait, the users will not come if the software's not there, so it's a paradox. Ooh, paradox. Because, what was that? There was a reason, I forget what, oh yeah, because I mean, like, historically that's been the situation where, yeah, the users won't show up to a device if there's no software, and the software won't be made for the device if there's no users to actually take advantage of it. A kind of example of this is all the way back in like the 80s with the good old-fashioned Commodore computers. There was, despite the fact that people don't know, a Commodore 128 that actually was a thing in the wild, but the reason why it was kind of never really a thing is because, well, very little software was actually designed to take advantage of it since it completely supported backwards compatibility with the C64. And because there wasn't a strong library of software, people never really bought it because there was very little benefit to buying this device when the C64 could do almost everything that it could do. And there's basically no extra software they could run because there was no one who actually had it. Developers wanted to actually make the most possible money, so they targeted the lowest common denominator and didn't develop for the Commodore 65 and cycle. Modern day computing platforms have basically solved that by making everything effectively backwards compatibility. And, you would think that, nothing's ever going to be built that can take advantage of new hardware. But that's not true. You see, generally, things are very backwards compatible in the sense that I can run this program on older hardware or newer hardware, and it should work just fine. But, especially with games and stuff in modern day, well, they are built in such a way where they're given options to be able to change performance and visual quality settings. That way it can run on lower end devices, get all those sales, but also being able to take advantage of the higher end systems of the day, which allows technology to continue to march forwards in these manners. Because when new hardware is available, new better hardware is available, developers will eventually take advantage of said hardware. Wow, that TNT is a very far range of where it's audible. I need some blocks. Oh. At least, okay, I should preface that last stuff. Okay, at least that's how I interpret the situation. And that makes sense to me. I don't know, maybe there were some other factors as to why modern platforms are actually viable in the world of how developers and users use them. Fitting with this, the reason why a Chromebook or something like that would be theoretically successful is because it just runs a web browser. And it can do anything you can do in a web browser, which is a lot. And so therefore it has some practical utility for current people. They can do anything they can do in a web browser on this device. So if all they need to do is use a web browser, well, this device is perfect. It makes logical sense like that, right? So it had like a base of people that it could go to act, or a reason, or had a practical purpose for people to be able to actually use it on launch. Unlike a product which is just in search of a thing. I mean, obviously, when new markets come around, like the smartphone market, obviously, it wasn't a thing. But mind you, the way people used phones before the iPhone came out was significantly different. They were devices to call and text, and the iPhone couldn't do that. It could call and text, and it also did some other things. So people were like, oh, this new fancier phone has a touch screen. Ooh, it's got a calculator on it. Ooh. All that stuff worked like you would expect it to. Oh, but then as people got accustomed to, being able to just do anything on their phones, it, gradually morphed into what it is today. And this is also why Windows Phone, I guess, didn't work, you know, time and time again. It's kind of a brand new platform where, you know, in an industry that already exists, but nothing actually exists on it. Developing for it is a pain, and then, especially with Windows Phone, you got the added cost of the fact that the operating system on the phone wasn't free. It was paid for, just like Windows, so compared to Android, which was really their actual competitor, you know, you put the same OS on the phones, Windows Phone being, you know, effectively runnable on the same hardware as Android. Android would just, you know, people would almost hands down buy the Android because not only did the apps they want to use actually exist on Android already, but it was cheaper because you didn't have to pay for Windows on top of the actual device. I mean, nowadays if Microsoft were to launch Windows Phone, they won't, to be clear. If they were, however, in modern day to do Windows Phone again, they would most likely do it less dumb. And they'd, you know, actually make it free. Because, I mean, Windows 10, 11 is basically free these days. You don't have to really pay for it. You probably should, but you don't have to. Anyhow, actually, I'm gonna go take a leak. So please enjoy the sound of this TNT going off while I'm taking a leak. Never mind, someone is showering, so I cannot take a leak right now, which sucks, because I really have to take a leak. I should stop talking about this now. And move on to the next thing that we're doing here, which is the sidewalks. We are making great progress on the roads today, people. It's been 1.5 hours since the stream started. And yeah, we're doing great. We're almost done with the normal roads, and then we can get started on the higher roads. I'm just going to get rid of the stone from my inventory, so we can move over to the smooth stone. Alright, what are we gonna talk about next? Alright, there's the actual slubs for the slide slock. Actually, I could do the internals here. Anyhow, so let's see. What else has been happening recently? Not too much. Oh yeah, it's February. Would you believe it already? February. Somehow we've made it to February already. Which is crazy that that's already the case. A whole month of the year is gone and I don't even know what I'm doing. Something I guess I could talk about here a little bit is yeah, the recent news that Satisfactory is going to move towards 1.0 this year, which is interestingly similar to the fact that Scrap Mechanic is trying to go to 1.0 this year as well. Let's see who actually makes it first. Because while I think Scrap Mechanic was supposed to technically go to 1.0 last year, but then they got delayed for reasons of quality, I think. At least that's what they say. They got delayed for quality reasons or whatever. Hopefully the game's not a fucking buggy mess when it launches and it, you know, bucks the trend in the gaming industry. Although, to be fair, it would be par for the course for Scrap Mechanic, which is already a buggy mess, to continue being a buggy mess into its full release. I wouldn't put it past them, and I wouldn't blame them for doing it, because, you know, it's Scrap Mechanic. You kind of expect this out of this game. Like, it is just a buggy mess. Mind you, it was a buggy mess before it was cool to be a buggy mess on release. And it hasn't even released yet. It's just a buggy mess for the sake of being a buggy mess, or something like that. Oh yeah, also, something I could talk about is a while back, I think Durf, who was, you know, or at least was popular in the Scrap Mechanic modding community, but then, I don't know, people got sick of him and he kind of left that. He did a video talking about how, oh, the developers of Scrap Mechanic are dumb for not being able to do collision properly. Things are always falling through the ground. They don't know anything. Come on, guys, it's very simple. Here's a simulation I made. And he did like a 1D simulation of how to fix the physics. And it was like, okay, cool. But even back then I was like, okay, cool, that's cool and all, but now do this in 3D and in the physics engine used by Scrap Mechanic, which I believe is called bullet physics. And then come back and show how easy it is. Obviously he probably never saw my comment saying something like that, but years later now, when I've actually tried to do implementing collisions in 3D myself that are pretty good, I even more understand, wow, it's actually kind of hard to do that in a performant way. I don't even know how the hell I do what Durf was thinking there. Because maybe I just don't know enough about like linear algebra, but still, it's just like, wow, okay, that seems ridiculously hard or ridiculously costly, because basically his solution was, oh, just draw a line to the point of intersection and then just be like, hey, has it passed? If yes, you've intersected. Well, there's a lot of problems with that. First of all, we're not just a single line in a single dimension. We're colliding 3D objects together, specifically triangles on triangles. Which, yeah, that's not necessarily going to work the most performantly, especially if you have to, like, okay, you're taking, like, I don't know, whatever the closest point, let's say, is from the moving object to the ground. You have to go through all the triangles in the ground to see, is it colliding with any of them? Which, I mean, is kind of what collision algorithms are doing, but they do it in a much smarter way. And that's already going to be extremely expensive for just a singular, you know, part or singular point. There's other points that we also need to test the collision of for other things. So the performance just does not make sense. I mean, obviously you could improve performance by doing some smarter, like, management to figure out what it's possible for this thing to be colliding with by, like, splitting up everything that could be collided into, like, better data structures for storing it that allow you to more easily be like, okay, if it's in this region, do that. But you can still have, like, a large amount of triangles within this particular region that it could be colliding with, and it also might be colliding with something in a neighboring region, so you got to factor that stuff in. You see, it's all very complicated, and then the collision algorithms, especially for 3D, aren't very cheap at all. Like, Minecraft is in a unique perspective where it can do a very cheap collision detection for its 3D environment and just be done with it, because, well, in Minecraft, the entire world is made out of blocks and axis-aligned bounding boxes. Even if you've seen, like, mods with, you know, parts that, like, are on an angle, the hitboxes for those blocks or whatever, or indeed the entities themselves, are always axis-aligned boxes. And that's because you can do a very simple and easy collision check for any two rectangular prisms that are directly aligned to whatever axes they're in to see whether or not they have collided, which is just effectively just seeing is the maximum component of this greater than the minimum component of this. If so, then they're colliding. That is literally quite simple as it is, and you can really easily do that. And because this entire world is block-based, that makes it quite simple. And, well, it's a large grid, so you only really have to check the collisions for the specific blocks near-ish to where the player's position is, or where the hitbox is. Obviously, the hitbox can be larger, and then you got to check more places. But it's still not really an issue because it's because of the, you know, axis-aligned bounding box. When you actually go into more complex 3D shapes, that's when it becomes a problem. Because anything that isn't access line bounding boxes is going to be considerably more expensive to calculate than an access line bounding box collision. Now, an access line bounding box collision is a good place to start, because if you draw a box which encompasses whatever, high poly shape or whatever that you want to detect a collision with, well, okay, it does have to be within a bounding box of some sort, because it will have two, I guess, vertexes, which are, or will have, the vertexes will have extreme values, which are the maximum and minimum values of the shape. So a good place to start with collisions in a general 3D environment is check, do the bounding boxes that encompass the entire shapes overlap at all? If they do overlap, then there's a possibility that they do collide, so we can go further. But if they don't overlap, there's no way they can be colliding, so we'll just say they don't. It's a very easy optimization you can make, which greatly speeds up the efficiency of a collision algorithm. But there are probably a million collision algorithms, some of them significantly more efficient, and actually a part of how you apply a collision algorithm can also significantly affect how actually efficient it is. So, because, I mean, obviously, in the end, it will come down to iterating over a collection of objects that you want to see if they collide with each other. But the way you choose which objects to iterate over can really make a difference, because obviously you don't want to be iterating over literally everything, because that would be extraordinarily expensive. At least you usually don't want to be iterating over everything. So it's best to do some algorithmically do some things to figure out, okay, what is it reasonable that could be collided with by this thing? So in Minecraft, for instance, an example of that would be chunks, which have multiple purposes. For the first person, I cannot speak. The first thing that chunks are really good at doing is, well, actually splitting the world into savable areas that can be loaded, that are, individual areas that can just be loaded one after another, but not all at once. That is the first thing chunks are good for. But the second thing they're good for is actually, optimizing collision a bit, because you only really have to check the chunk something is in and its neighbors to see if anything is colliding, because obviously it won't be colliding with anything that's 2 chunks away from it, probably. Unless it's like really big, but that's a little bit, that's less of our concern at the moment. So I only really have to check the chunk I'm in and the neighboring chunk to make sure I haven't collided with something like this. And wow, you're good. You've all of a sudden taken from everything that is literally loaded in the world all the way down to this 16 by 16 area, or I guess if I'm near the edge of it, these 16 by 32 area, or heaven forbid I'm in on this corner of the chunks, this 32 by 32 area, to check for collisions, which is significantly cheaper of a calculation to make than, literally everything. Now, Minecraft is a very simplistic example of how you do this, because obviously Minecraft has a much simpler world. Large video games can obviously split this up differently. If you're in the middle of a desert with not much around, it's probably more feasible that you're inside of a larger area for collision detection, because, well, you don't need to split it up into a lot of smaller areas, which can add storage. That looks odd. You don't need to split this up into areas that add storage costs when you could just, well, use this entire space as one thing. But if you're in a dense urban area, you're probably going to have a lot of smaller sections for collision checks, because, well, because there's a lot more things that you could check collision with. I mean, one interesting way that you could subdivide, if you have a static and fixed map size, a way that you could subdivide stuff is that you could just have your entire map have one giant bounding box around it, just so you can see, okay, is anything on the map, am I colliding with, and could I be colliding with anything off the map? Am I not way off into the space? And if you're way off into space, you're cool, end of vision collision. But you could do an access on bounding box check around just the entire map, make sure you're somewhere on the map to collide with. And then you could split that map down into, once you've decided that yes, I'm definitely within the map bounds, you could split the map up into 4 subsections. Am I colliding with any of those? If you are colliding with one of those, you could split that up into more more subsections. And that is another way, I guess, you could store the you could store your collision, or you could do your collision detection on a bigger scale, with the detecting where you are in the map done by being at higher levels of an access line bounding box data structure. Because just adding another layer of bounding boxes is still probably much cheaper than adding a high poly collision detection. And then you get down to like the immediate like collection of objects around the character, where each of those is going to have their own bounding box that you check if it's violating. And I'm saying this, and now I'm talking about this a little bit from experience, as I have done some work on collision algorithms that I intend to add to my game in the near future. And based off the way that, at least the algorithm that I've gone through, which is supposedly quite performant, does its collision detection, is it basically just takes a cloud of takes two clouds of vertexes and sees if those clouds of vertexes overlaps, basically. That's the easiest way I think I can describe it. So you take 2 point clouds and do these point clouds overlap. That's basically the gist of it. It's a lot more complicated than that, but for how actually complex it is and hard to wrap your head around what's actually happening, it is apparently quite performant. But it's still not nearly as performant as the access line bounding boxes, which is why I apply an access line bounding boxes check before I apply this algorithm, because again, you couldn't possibly be overlapping if you're, not within the same bounding box, so why even bother checking that? Now, I will say I have found a weird oddity with the way I've implemented this algorithm and got it to work, where if you have two cubes that are perfectly aligned with one another and then placed perfectly inside of each other so that all their corners match up, it won't detect a collision for some reason. Then there's also a certain diagonal plane that if you move it along that plane, it also won't detect the collisions. Which is curious. I don't know how or why that is even possible. But at this point, I am not going to ask. Actually, I think my theory as for why the my theory for why it doesn't detect that collision is because I have a text here that I'm going to respond to in a moment. But my theory for why the collision isn't getting detected is because the point clouds are just like, or the point clouds are just overlapping in such a way where the actual way it detects collision falls like right on the edge of a line that is not greater than or less than a specific value, but exactly equal to a specific value, which it can't exactly check for very easily. So it, just doesn't detect the collision. All right, I will quickly respond to this text message here. So I will mute as I respond here. Alright, sorry for that interruption. I just needed to, respond there. We're probably going to get a response back in a moment. So, until then, we can continue rolling. And I don't remember what I was talking about anymore, so now I need to think of something else to talk about. Ooh. Something to talk about. This is when I start realizing that I have no idea what I have not prepared topics to talk about during the stream. I can't really comment on what I'm doing as, well, it's not too particularly interesting. I guess I gotta talk about what I did last week on Sunday. So the live stream last week on Sunday, if you didn't see it, was me basically trying to get to the bottom of, which is most of the stream, but then ultimately fix an issue that we've had here on the server, where a written book that contains a entity selector in it will only actually resolve that selector if the person who opens the book is opt on the server. And I can just recap what happened. I did get to the bottom of it. It turns out that a selector will just completely refuse to work and throw an error if whoever is trying to use the selector does not have an op permission level of 2 or greater. Which is weird. I don't know why that's a thing, but that is the whole reason why it's not working. And so I basically just disabled that check. Was all I did. Was all I ended up doing, and it works. But I haven't done anything else with the mod since. I probably could release it. It's like, hey, it just does this. I'll probably end up including it on the server in the foreseeable future until the bug actually gets fixed. Responding. Respond to that message there. Okay, mark that as read. All right. Yeah, that's. Yeah, I don't know why specifically they limit a selector to being op permission level of at least 2, because to me it doesn't make sense. Because the only place that at least I can see that you would actually be able to use a selector, which isn't just the name of the player, is which is basically, if you're not opt, it's the message command. And besides preventing players from just straight up messaging every single player at once, which, I mean, the only real people you're stopping is the honest people from doing that. If someone really wanted to message everyone, they'd get like a hacked client, which would just go and manually spam the command to the server with a different name each time. Which, instead of just using the selector, which will only just increase the bandwidth. So, I don't really understand that. Besides that, you can't use a selector anywhere else as a non-operator, so why you can't do it, it beats me. Alright. I'm not gonna leave. Man, I really feel like I have to go to the bathroom. But, yeah, they're still in the shower. If I'm actually silent, I can hear what's going on in the bathroom. Hear the noises in the shower, which is, fun when I'm trying to go to bed. And I just hear the shower going. Or actually in the morning, actually, as well. If I'm, like, laying in bed, waking up, I just hear the shower going. It's like, it's always fun. Always completely fun when that happens. But hey, that's the way it works, I guess, in college living. Hey, it could be worse. I could actually have to, share this, personal space with other people, which I thankfully do not have to do. I get an entire room to myself. which is great. And this is a pretty standard living arrangement on this campus as well, so it's not like I shelled out extra to have my own private space. It was a good chunk of the dorms on this campus were designed that way, I think. Or at least that was the original intent. They are, I think some of them are now designed to, for some reason, connect two people together to inconvenience them, I guess? I don't know. It seems like they're spending more money making it so to make a more affordable room that two people can live in at once. That just doesn't have a wall in the middle of it, basically. Which raises some questions like, wait, why do you do this? You're spending money making modifications to existing buildings, which are actually quite old. For what purpose exactly? I actually do not understand what purpose they're doing that for, because obviously they're not really losing money by allowing people to stay in those rooms at a cheaper price. But you can pay less to be inconvenienced more. I don't know. It beats me, and I don't know. What schools do is just so weird. There's also, like, obviously, the campus is otherwise falling apart, it's old. A good chunk of the streetlights are just out, and they haven't replaced them. So, like, in, like, one of the more frequently trafficked areas, where there's, like, a road where people come into campus, instead of, fixing all the streetlights, they just put up a couple giant, like, floodlights used on construction sites that are powered by gasoline. Instead of running extension cords from somewhere to power them with electricity, they're just paying for more gasoline to run these things. They are very bright, but it's like this can't be cheaper than just fixing all the lights. Unless there's like an electric issue. Still, that's not cheaper, because the gasoline is over time is just going to add up to more than just fixing the lights and running them off, the electrical grid. Like, goddamn. I mean, at least they're generally taking care of the lights directly in the residential areas and on the paths. Mostly. Well, I say that. There's a bridge on campus that has lights on it that they do actually seem to be relatively actively taking care of, but I feel like that's just because they take normal, like, household light bulbs, which they have lying around for when the light bulbs go out in the dorms, because that happens. But, they're light bulbs, they're quite cheap. So they just, like, pop open the enclosure, unscrew the old bulb, put the new bulb in, because, these lights, they're, like, under the railings. So, they're really easy to access compared to the lights on the lampposts. I'm pretty sure they're also just normal lights, which are LEDs, so, it's very simple to just get them replaced and not really worry about it. Why is there? Oh, yeah, that's why that's there. So it's always like, yes. The logic that these people, or that is provided by this, will never cease to amaze me. If I actually remember, outside of the dorm building that I'm in, last semester, for a good chunk of the semester, there was a light that was, like, broken, because I think the way streetlights generally work is they have two bulbs in them. Or two filaments in them, which light will alternate actually using. Sometimes it's when you get closer to the light, it'll turn on a second one or a brighter one. And for some of the lights, that's just the second one is just completely broken, so whenever you approach it, just turns the light off instead of making it brighter. But for other ones, like apparently the one out front here, they just occasionally alternate the filaments. And I guess that's to keep them from burning out. And that makes sense. I guess if these things are that, like, they produce that much energy, especially back in the day before LEDs. I mean, with LEDs, I don't think it's necessary anymore. Back in the day, you didn't want these things burning out, so you put a second filament in there. So one would go for a while. It'd be, like, real bright, real hot. And then after a predetermined amount of time, when it was considered, okay, it might start being risky now, you'd turn the other one on. And then after a short while, when that one's probably bright enough by now, you turn the first one off. Probably no noticeable change in brightness to the people around, but it prolongs the length of the light. As long as both filaments exist, because when one burns out, you all of a sudden get the situation where it's on for a while, and then it's off. And then it's on, and then it's off. Now, thankfully, my bedroom did not face this light, but from when I was hanging out in the common areas, where you can see the light from, it was like, the light's back on. Now it's off. It was distracting, you know, at the corner of your eye out the window, it's like, oh, the light's back. Now it's off. Now it's on. Now it's off. But hey, they did eventually fix it. And now it's a cooler color temperature, so that's fun. Again, my bedroom doesn't face it, so I don't have to deal with it, but for those who do face it, that must suck. Because, you know, colleges don't typically provide the best blinds for you. I don't know, maybe they did at one point when this building was first built. They provided like proper blinds where you could actually block out the light, but the modern ones don't at all block out the light. I mean, they do block a decent amount of light, and you can't, like, directly see into them, but they also don't block out that much light either. So, you know, hope there's not a bright light. Hope there's not a bright light, or the person who's parked outside your window doesn't decide to go and start up their car at 2 a.m., which will, of course, turn on their headlights, which are shining directly towards your window, which will basically light up your room as you're trying to fall asleep. I swear, some of the people here are weird. It's like, in the previous semester at one point, there was like, oh, I forget what it was. There was just like, at 2 a.m., 2 a.m., I don't know. I was real tired trying to go to sleep. There are some people who decided to have a music listening party in their car, where they jacked the speakers, and I could just hear the bass. It was just like, what the hell are these people doing? It's like 1 a.m., bro. Go to freaking bed. Stop dancing out in front of the building here. Oh, they were in the car actually. Like, I can hear your stuff. What are you doing? If you're doing this to try to be courteous to your neighbors, it isn't working. Anyhow, I've heard that the bathroom has opened up, so I'm now going to go take that leak I was talking about earlier. Alright, I'm back, and it is not nighttime, but it almost is. Alright, we'll just wait out this here, grab some more smooth stone. Alright. I have been live for 2 hours, 2 minutes, and the WAN show has still yet to start, so therefore, the stream continues. Stream continues. Also, actually, I didn't mention this. I was on time for the stream today, basically. I was actually ready beforehand. And then looked away from the clock for 2 seconds, and then it was past time. But I was actually on time for once, which doesn't happen often. But hey, what else would I have been doing? You know, producing an episode for the... Okay, we are so close to actually finishing. Oh, yes. Sorry for the interruption. You know, just had some conversation with people there. You know, the walls here are paper thin, so, you know, don't be surprised if now that they're out of the shower, you can, you know, hear the people in the next door room just chit-chatting away, because I sometimes do when I'm trying to fall asleep. And I'm like, hey, could you... And I, you know, text over to them, hey, could you shut the fuck up? I'm trying to sleep. Actually, that's only happened once. And he didn't get the message till the next day either. Oh, that was fun. But hey, yeah, that's just the situation that you're in, right? Or that I'm in. Oh, damn it. I did get more for a reason here. So excited that we're actually finally going to have basically the entire grid here in downtown done. And we can then get started. Of course, as I mentioned, on the other taller roads that go through the area. I think I do actually mention in the episode that I'm trying to produce for this week. I do vaguely mention them when I was talking about some planning that I was doing. It's like, I can't build shit in places because roads. I mean, it's all for the looks. This whole city is probably for the looks until I build something that is in total eyesore and it's like, it's not about the looks, it's about filling out space and making it kind of look like there's a city. Because you see, this is the type of building that would be built by a capitalist. See, the capitalist doesn't care about the architecture, even though, you know, in the past they did. The modern day, they don't. They don't really care about architectural looks at all unless they're like a corporation trying to show off how much money they have, and then they shell out for the architecture. Or, you know, they're, I guess, an office building in a nice area attempting to attract fancy clients. But if a company is building a building for themselves, they do not want to be shelling out money for it. They want to be shelling out as little as possible. So they are going to go with the barest of minimum designs that just serves its function, no frills. So like a factory, for instance. They're not going to just make it look nice, usually. I mean, I feel like SpaceX would do something unnecessary with the factory just to make it like look nice. I don't know. Maybe they'll have a nice glass window. But besides that, it's just going to be built to its function as cheaply as possible. That probably endangers the health and safety of the people who work there. It's not built for, you know, the looks. It's built for the functionality. And I feel like with some of the buildings I'm going to build, that's what it's going to look like. It's going to be, wait, you wanted this to look as good as the International Trade Tower? Why, you think I can actually build stuff that looks that good? That thing is an outlier in my building skills. I swear, I don't know how I made that look so good. Literally everything else is going to suck. And that is the notification that the WAN show is now live. And this is also the notification that this sidewalk is basically over. And there is a whole other section. But with that, I'm going to have to say thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Please make sure to leave a like on the stream on your way out. And if you enjoyed, please make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications so that you don't miss future streams like this one. Check out my game. As I mentioned, I produced an update for this week, which is linked in the description. And I will see you all in the next live stream /video. Oh, there's a pillager patrol behind.